Well, thank you, Howard, for that very kind introduction, and thank you all for having me here tonight. As both a mom and an Illinoisan, I'm so grateful for the work that ELPC does every day. After all, my children live in this environment too. I still remember sitting in a House Oversight Committee hearing when I was in the House of Representatives, and the hearing was on the Flint water crisis, and this happened a couple years ago. At the time, my older daughter was just a year old. I remember looking out into the audience and seeing all of these family members who had traveled by bus from Flint, Michigan to Washington, D.C. And in the back, I never saw her face, but I could see an arm and a hand in the back of the audience, and it never left this position. And in that hand was a baby bottle that looked exactly like the one that my baby drank out of, a little bottle with a pink top, but unlike my daughter's, who gets her water in Hoffman Estates, Illinois, the water in this bottle from Flint, Michigan was brown. I couldn't, and all these years later, I still can't begin to imagine what it would have been like to have had to drink that water while I was pregnant, or to have no choice but to give it to my baby because I couldn't afford the bottles of bottled water that would be safe to drink. But that kind of nightmare remains everyday reality for far, far too many parents across this country. So it's been 5 years since the city of Flint tried to save a few dollars by swapping out its drinking water supply from Detroit's system to the Flint River. This set off a chain reaction of events that poisoned more than 6,000 kids in just 18 months, as too many elected officials covered their eyes to the crisis at hand. Yet to this day, despite the work that ELPC has done, some at the EPA and elsewhere in government are repeating past sins. And I remember asking EPA Administrator Pruitt, what was the safe level of lead in drinking water for children? And he did not know. He did not know that the answer was 0. I asked him this at his nomination hearing, and then I asked him it again a year later, and he still didn't know that it was 0. So these folks are still sitting idly by as countless Americans risk getting sick every time they take a sip of water or a breath of air, with lower income neighborhoods and communities of color getting poisoned at higher rates, covering their eyes as Black kids on the south side of Chicago get asthma at twice the national average, as families in Flint still don't have access to clean water. Imagine if your child was one of those who's gotten sick because this administration, whether it's Pruitt or Wheeler or anybody else that they've appointed to the EPA, because this administration refuses to take action in such obvious crises. Imagine how devastating that would be. As a mother, it breaks my heart. As a senator, it makes me furious. And as a ranking member, on the subcommittee tasked with oversight of these issues, you better believe I'm going to do something about it. Every American has a right to breathe in clean air and drink clean water, no matter where they live, the color of their skin, or the size of their income. And that is why last month I launched the Senate's first ever Environmental Justice Caucus to make sure that crises in poorer communities of color garner the same attention as those that take place in more affluent neighborhoods. And that's why I've reached across the aisle pleading with colleagues to see this as a bipartisan issue, ultimately working with folks from both parties to introduce legislation like the No Lead Act, which would require the EPA to revise the lead and copper rule to better regulate lead in drinking water, or the Get the Lead Out of Assisted Housing Act, which would protect low-income families through more frequent, more thorough testing, or the Great Lakes Water Protection Act, which would ban sewage dumping into the basin. Because it is horrifying that every year, even now, 22 billion gallons of untreated sewage and stormwater get funneled into the same bodies of water that supply drinking water to 30 million people to this day. And I've written repeatedly to Trump's EPA, demanding that they finally do something that actually protect Americans from getting sick from our water. You know, something other than rolling back the WOTUS rule. Something other than choosing corporate polluters over our families, making it easier for companies to contaminate the systems we depend on for clean water. And progress here hasn't been easy, and it has not been quick. But we are moving forward, and that's thanks in part to allies like you. It comes down to this. While Flint was a tragedy, it was not an anomaly. No elementary schooler should be scared to drink out of their school fountain. No father should worry about his child breathing in ethylene oxide at the playground, and no mother should have to hold a bottle full of brown water up to her baby's lips. This is a matter of health and safety. It is a matter of equality, and it is a matter of justice. You don't have to be a policy wonk or a progressive to get why this issue is important. Just as you don't have to be a Democrat to acknowledge one of the most obvious facts of our time: climate change isn't some made-up hoax or some far-off nightmare. It is real, and climate change is here. The Midwest is flooding, the West is burning, Virginia is sinking, and the Pacific is rising. Temperatures are climbing while our options are dwindling. So let's be clear, this is a national and global security threat, something that military leaders and Trump's own intelligence officials admit, as terrorist groups like ISIS and Boko Haram use drought to solidify their power in Syria and Nigeria, as storms ravage our military bases and rising sea levels threaten to swallow 100 US military bases. There are no shades of gray here. For the sake of our planet and our national security, we need to take action to curb climate change before it is too late. One way to do so is to pivot the military further away from fossil fuel, investing in green energy instead. Even staunch Republicans, like former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, have spent years pushing for this, not just because it slashed pollutants, though that'd be reason enough, not just because it's cheaper in the longer run to switch to biofuels, though it is, not even because it reduces our dependence on foreign oil and cuts our ties to oil-rich bad actors like Saudi Arabia, but because it is proven time and again to save troops' lives. Don't take my word for it. Listen to former Secretary and General Mattis, who all but begged the military to untether itself from fossil fuel since militants led a major assault on a diesel convoy in 2003. Why? Because fuel supply convoys make for easy, predictable targets. In Afghanistan in 2007, one of every 24 fuel convoys suffered casualties. Even George W. Bush agreed, setting renewable energy benchmarks for our military to reach, benchmarks that became more ambitious under President Obama. And in the years since, we've learned that this policy works. Renewable energy keeps our troops safer, as efficient fuel use slashes the number of refueling stops. Mobile solar panels let troops turn off generators, helping them move through enemy territory unheard and undetected. And low-weight, longer-lasting batteries lighten troops' packs, meaning they can carry more bullets instead. That's how I sell it to the Republicans. As one former Navy captain put it, and I quote, "Years ago, the belief was you could either be efficient or a capable warfighter. Now, we've found they are interdependent. By being more efficient, you become a better warfighter," end quote. In other words, every dollar we invest in green energy makes our military stronger and might just save our planet in the process. Because look, the Earth won't stop warming just because a climate denier is tweeting from the Oval Office. This issue should not and cannot be considered partisan if we want our kids to have as many tomorrows as they deserve. So for more than 2 decades now, ELPC has made a name for itself by thinking creatively about some of the biggest crises of our time, embracing uncommon ideas for the sake of the common good. That's the kind of approach this country needs to take every day from here on out. And that's the kind of mindset that I'm going to bring to this work as long as I'm lucky enough to call myself your senator. So thank you for letting me be one of your partners in this fight, for working about to bring a future which our families won't have to worry about the water they sip or the air they breathe, and for doing all you can to ensure that our grandchildren will have a habitable planet to call home. Thank you.